On a hot summer night, silence can be the most terrifying sound of all. You think the darkness hides nothing more than crickets and the hum of the breeze. But sometimes, the shadows are watching. Sometimes, the air itself carries a secret, one that could end your life before you even understand what's happening. Imagine being a teenager, sent to deliver a pizza to a house where the windows are dead black, and the only movement you see is a curtain twitching until unmarked police cars surround you. Imagine tucking your children into bed at your family's beach house, only to hear slow, deliberate breathing inside the walls, followed by a filthy stranger screaming and clawing at your glass door. And imagine lying under a sky full of stars with your best friend, laughing and drinking, only to close your eyes for 5 seconds and open them to find her gone, as if time itself swallowed her whole. Welcome to The Price Paid, where true horror isn't fiction, it's waiting in the shadows of ordinary nights. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear will crawl under your skin and never let go. By the time that summer rolled around, I was 17 and stuck in a job that felt like a punishment handed down by the universe. The pizza place sat on the far edge of my hometown, where the streetlights thinned out and the asphalt turned patchy. The sign buzzed like a mosquito that never died. The ovens breathed out air that smelled like old cardboard, and the crust tasted like someone had baked a shoe. The only saving grace was that the nights were slow. I stocked the cooler, wiped the counter for the 10th time, and watched my manager Russell scroll through forums while pretending to manage. The delivery car was a dented relic with a roof light that flickered like a warning from God, but at least it was not my car. I told myself that counted for something. The air that night set heavy and wet, the kind of humid blanket that made your shirt stick to your back. When the tablet buzzed on the counter, it made me jump. Large sausage and olive. I remember the olives because we almost never had them in stock. The ticket printed with a small hiss, and I skimmed it the way I always did. The address was a quiet road past the end of our delivery zone, the kind of place where the map faded into grays and greens. I was ready to reject it. Before I could, Russell lifted his eyes long enough to say we had not had a run in over an hour, so I should take it. He spoke like a man trying to move air, not ideas. I shrugged. 20 or 30 minutes out of the store sounded better than staring at a mop bucket. I boxed the pizza, slid the receipt under the lid, and reached for my phone. That was when I actually read the delivery notes. Park on the street behind the house. Walk through the backyard. Knock on the back door only. I stood there with the receipt stapled to the box and imagined sensible reasons. Renovation. Sleeping baby. Paranoid spouse. I found excuses. Because that is what teenagers do when a feeling is gnawing at them, and they do not want to look it in the face. I told myself the instructions were nothing and stepped into the heat. The drive felt longer than the map promised. The farther I went, the more the houses spread out like teeth knocked loose. The windows in my car fogged at the edges, and the air outside smelled like sun-baked plastic and damp dirt, that sour summer scent that makes your skin crawl. I tried the windows down for a minute, then surrendered to the air conditioning that coughed like an old smoker and finally pressed back the heat. The road narrowed, the trees leaned in. By the time the voice on my phone told me I had arrived, the sky had thickened into a deep navy bruise, and the world felt emptied out. The route had brought me behind the houses to a skinny lane of gravel that paralleled a row of backyards. The number I needed sat halfway down, set in a sagging fence with grass that had given up on being mowed. No porch lights burned, no lights inside either. The driveway that faced the main street, which I could see through gaps in the fence, held no car. My headlights caught a back door at the top of a short slope, white paint chalked and peeling, a little square window covered by a crooked curtain. I parked on the shoulder as instructed, tucked the pizza under my arm, and climbed. Every step up that hill sounded too loud, crushed stone grinding under my shoes. I angled my flashlight at my feet so I would not trip in the weeds that reached for my ankles. At the top, the back door stared at me with that little square of glass like a single tired eye. I knocked. It was a polite knock, the kind you give a neighbor. Nothing. I knocked harder, imagining Russell rolling his eyes if I came back with an unpaid pie. Still nothing. I raised my hand a third time, and that was when the curtain twitched. It was barely a ripple, the kind of accidental movement a finger makes when it brushes fabric. It was enough to flip my stomach over. My mouth had just opened to say something through the door when headlights washed across the scrubby yard and died. 2 unmarked cars rolled in behind mine, dark shapes with engines still ticking. One door opened. A man in jeans and a plain jacket stepped out. the beam of someone else's headlights catching his face for a second. He lifted a hand and gave the simplest motion in the world. Come here. I thought I was in trouble. Trespassing, I told myself. Or I had parked where I should not. I started toward him with the pizza box pressed to my chest like a shield. Before I reached him, he flashed a badge, the metal glinting once and then vanishing into his palm. His voice was quiet in the night. Go back to your car and wait. That was it. No explanations, no questions yet. Something about him made it easy to obey. I backed down the slope, slid into the driver's seat, and watched through the windshield while my car's engine shivered at idle. At first I thought there were only 2 of them. Then shapes detached from the shadows. 4, 5, maybe more. They did not speak. Their flashlights carved, moving slices of light along the ground and under the eaves, along the fence gap that never quite closed, up to the door where I had just knocked like an idiot. One tried the handle with his fingertips, the way a person touches something that might explode. When it did not budge, he retreated and passed a small nod to another. They circled, thin lines of light skimming the siding, edges of holsters like silent punctuation marks. Minutes stretched, each one clicking by inside my chest rather than on a clock. The neighborhood remained dead. The air pressed in. A moth battered itself against my windshield, drawn to the dash glow, then drifted away. I held myself as still as I could, as if motion might invite notice, and told myself I was safe because I was near the police, and also told myself I was not safe at all because I had just learned there was something to be afraid of. The first officer returned, crouched by my window, and I rolled it down. His eyes cut to the pizza box on the seat, and he let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it too long. He kept his voice level, but what he said made the world tilt. There was an ongoing investigation connected to the property. They had been repositioning when I arrived. He apologized for not intercepting me sooner. He asked to see the order. I showed him the app screen. The address was there, a first name, a phone number that meant nothing in that moment. He copied the number, then told me to leave immediately. I told him my boss would be furious if I returned with a full pizza. He did not smile. He repeated himself and stood up. The conversation was over. I pulled away, the tires chattering on gravel, and only when the lane opened onto a wider road did the night seem to breathe again. The drive back was quieter.
Over there,
the air smelled like nothing. The radio, which I had not noticed, was off. Stayed off. For a few minutes, I told myself it would make a good story. Then the good story turned on me. Somewhere around the old feed store, I realized
How are you doing?
that if the curtain moved, someone had been standing inches from me on the other side of a thin sheet of glass.
Did you see
If the officers were quiet, it meant they expected a door to open or a window to crack or a body to dart. If they had not arrived just then, I did not know what would have happened when my knuckles hit the wood a third time. The thought sat in my stomach like a stone. By the time the neon sign of the pizza place buzzed into view, the stone had grown a second stone. Perhaps the order was not a mistake, or a hungry person's late meal. Perhaps it had been a test. I stepped out into the same heavy air and the same buggy glow. Russell asked where the money was. I set the box down and said the police had told me to leave. He raised his hands and let them fall. That was the whole conversation. I tossed the box in the trash and washed my hands twice like something invisible had gotten on me. The rest of the shift passed in silence, and when I finally lay in bed later, the ceiling looked like that small square window with the curtain barely moving, as if a fingertip were waiting there in the dark to make contact that never came. By the time I turned 40, life had dulled into something steady and predictable. I sold insurance. I came home to my wife and our 2 boys, ages 7 and 5. Boring was not a curse word anymore, was a blessing. My father had passed away a few years earlier after a long battle with cancer, leaving behind a modest beach house in Delaware. I had never even stepped foot inside it until it became mine. It was not fancy, but it sat 1 block off the boardwalk and carried the salt air right through its windows. The upstairs deck gave us a view of the ocean that felt like a postcard. That house turned into our retreat, the one good thing pulled from the grief of losing him.
You left me alone.
We went every summer carving out our own little family ritual among the gulls and surf. That summer night started like any other. The boys had collapsed after a long day in the sun, bodies heavy from sand and salt water. My wife and I poured wine, sat on the back deck, and played cards under a sky the color of bruised glass. The waves in the distance hushed and returned, like the slow pull of breath. It was peace, the kind of peace you only notice in contrast to everything else in life. Then my older son Jordan padded onto the deck in his pajamas, eyes wide and face pale. He said he could not sleep because something was scratching inside his room. I remember setting my glass down and giving my wife a small smile meant to calm her, Even though my stomach had already tightened, I told her to stay put and follow Jordan downstairs. His little hand pointed toward the wall by his bed. At first, all I heard was silence, but I knew better than to brush him off. We stood together for a long 30 seconds. Then I heard it faint but sharp, a sound that did not belong in the rhythm of a house. Scratch, scratch, scratch. My first thought was raccoons, or maybe a trapped bird. I crouched and pressed my ear to the wall, close to the baseboards. That was when I heard the sound that turned my bones to ice. Slow, deep breathing, not the kind of quick skittering breath an animal makes. Human, steady, patient. I stumbled back with a curse, my voice louder than I meant. Jordan's eyes flooded with fear. Before I could usher him out, the wall itself seemed to roar a guttural scream tearing through plaster and wood, raw and furious. I yanked my son by the arm and we ran. My only thought was to get his younger brother, Scott. I scooped Scott from his bed before his eyes even opened, his small body heavy in my arms, and sprinted toward the stairs. My voice cracked as I shouted for my wife. Another scream chased me, this one closer, as if the wall itself had peeled open. Halfway up the stairs, I turned. A man filthy, wild-eyed, hair hanging in greasy rope swaths sprinting down the hall behind us. His teeth flashed, his bare chest smeared with grime. For one dizzy moment, I thought I was seeing a nightmare bled into waking life. I threw my weight forward and somehow got the boys up onto the deck, where my wife waited, confusion hardening into terror as she saw what chased us. I slammed the sliding door shut just as the man hit it full force. The glass bowed but did not shatter. His hands clawed at the pane, streaking it with something dark. Dirt. Blood. Both. He shrieked words that made no sense. Fragments of rage and madness. Animal sounds wearing the mask of human speech. I pressed my body against the door with all my weight. My wife dragged the boys back, covering their ears. The man slammed and smeared and howled, and I braced for the moment when the door would explode inward, and my body would be the only thing between him and my family. Time thickened. 1 minute stretched into 5. Sweat ran into my eyes, and I did not dare wipe it away. My legs shook. He never slowed. His fury seemed endless, his energy bottomless. Then salvation arrived, in the form of pounding footsteps inside the house. 2 uniformed officers appeared from the kitchen, sprinting toward the glass door. One tackled the intruder from behind, dragging him to the floor. The other pressed in, pinning the man's arms while he kicked and snarled. My breath finally ripped free from my chest as I collapsed against the frame. The man's screams echoed even as they dragged him through the house, his voice splitting the night before the front door slammed. Only then did the silence return, but it was not the same silence as before. This one carried teeth. The officers asked for my account, and I gave it in fragments. They nodded, their eyes hard. Together we searched the house, and that was when I learned the truth. A crawl space ran beneath the porch, narrow and hidden unless you were looking. It connected to a loose panel inside my son's closet. From there, the entire foundation of the house could be accessed. The man had been living there. Weeks, maybe months. He had been inside our walls, he had been listening to us, waiting. The detective who followed up days later confirmed it. The man admitted he had discovered the space during the off-season. He had stolen food from us and the neighbors. He had claimed the house as his own, and when we returned, he saw us as trespassers in his home. He had planned to hurt us. That night was supposed to be the night. We left the beach house early. Trauma lingers like salt on skin. You can wash it, but it clings. For the rest of that summer, we did not go back. I hired a crew to seal the crawl space, to cut off the artery that had let him slip into our lives. We returned the following year, but even as I watched the boys run in the surf and laugh with my wife on the deck, I felt it, the echo of a scream behind the walls. The truth that a house can hold secrets you do not want to find. And sometimes, those secrets breathe. When I was 16, the world felt wide open in ways that were both thrilling and lonely. I lived in a rural patch of countryside where the silence stretched for miles and summer nights seemed endless. Those nights were the best part of the season. The air was warm, the stars were uncountable, and the dark carried a promise that no one could find me. I had a friend named Taylor who lived for that kind of freedom. She was bolder than I was, always pushing past small limits just to feel the rush of crossing them. On one night in July, she convinced me to take our bikes out past the edge of town. Just us, a cheap bottle of wine, and a field we had never seen before. Looking back, it was one of the last times we went stargazing together. And maybe that is because of what happened there. We rode until houses fell away behind us, and the roads thinned to cracked pavement bordered by weeds. Taylor stopped suddenly, pointed at nothing in particular. and said we had arrived. The place was empty land, flat and wide with a sky so clear it looked like someone had scrubbed it clean. We spread out a blanket, popped the cork, and drank the sour wine while pointing at constellations we only half remembered. We laughed. We whispered. The stars overhead pulsed like an audience that belonged only to us. The air was calm, and we waited for shooting stars the way some people wait for miracles. Hours slipped. I felt the wine warm my body in the grass, pressing through the thin blanket. At one point, Taylor looked at me with an expression that lingered too long, as if she wanted something left unsaid. I remember the stillness of that moment more than the words we spoke. Then she laughed, and just like that, the tension passed. We both looked up in time to catch a streak of light ripping across the sky. Our laughter returned, giddy and breathless, as we shouted wishes into the empty field. For a few minutes, it felt perfect. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but just to sink deeper into that quiet. The air brushed my skin. The ground hummed beneath me. It could not have been more than 5 seconds. When I opened them, Taylor was gone. Her bike too. The field was unchanged, but it was empty. My bike leaned against the blanket as if mocking me with its ordinariness. I spun around, calling her name, expecting her to jump out laughing. The stars above looked dimmer, as though someone had smeared the night. The temperature had dropped. A chill skated along my arms and legs. Panic swelled. I pulled out my phone to call her, but before I could dial, the screen caught my attention. It read 3:0 a.m. exactly. Not midnight, not 1. 3. I blinked. I shook the phone. Less than a minute ago, it had been just after 11. The battery was full. The display was sharp. The time was real, and it made no sense. My heart pounded against my ribs. I dialed Taylor over and over, but the calls went unanswered. The emptiness around me pressed down like a hand. The stars, the grass, even the horizon felt foreign, like I had stepped into a copy of the world, with the details slightly wrong. Tears blurred my eyes as I snatched up my bike. The ride home was frantic, my legs burning, my lungs tearing open with every breath. The darkness along the road felt alive, leaning in. I did not stop until I was home, collapsing in my driveway, shaking with a fear that had no name. The next morning, I texted Taylor expecting outrage or confusion. Her reply made my blood run cold. She demanded to know why I had abandoned her. According to her, she was the one who had woken up alone at 3:0 a.m. She had waited an hour for me before biking home, furious and frightened. She swore I had vanished, just as I swore she had. We compared memories. They matched until the moment everything broke. We both remembered calling each other, yet neither of our phones had call logs. The records were empty. We argued, but no logic could untangle it. No evidence existed beyond our words. Eventually, we stopped discussing it, but the silence only sharpened the terror. For months, I lay awake at night, staring out my window, searching the stars for answers. They never gave me any. Taylor and I drifted apart, not from anger, but from the weight of that night pressing between us. She moved on. So did I. But sometimes when I see the sky crack open with stars, I remember that field, that missing hour, and the friend who vanished while I blinked. It has been years. We no longer speak. Yet I would stake my life on one truth. She still wonders, just as I do, about what swallowed us both that summer night. Because no matter how far time carries me, I know I was there. I know she was too. And I know something else was with us in that field, something that bent the world until one of us disappeared. 3 stories, 3 different lives. Yet when I place them side by side, the summer air itself seems to bind them, as though the heat and stillness of those nights called something out of hiding. Chris was just a teenager, trying to kill the boredom of a slow shift when he knocked on a door that should never have been knocked on. He expected a tip, maybe a grumble about cold pizza, but instead found himself standing in the crosshairs of an investigation, moments away from a mystery that had no intention of explaining itself. His only protection was the coincidence of undercover officers arriving in time, leaving him to wonder if he had been bait, a pawn in a game played behind curtains and glass. Hundreds of miles away, a father thought he was giving his family the kind of summer memory you treasure wine on the deck, children sleeping soundly, the hush of waves against sand. But from within the very bones of his inherited beach house came the sound of scratching, the heavy breath of a man who had burrowed into their lives like a parasite. The safety of walls turned treacherous, shelter transformed into a cage. In one violent moment, the illusion of safety shattered as the intruder slammed against the glass, wild and relentless, determined to claim the house as his own. For that family, summer would forever carry the echo of screams from inside the walls. And then there was the field under the stars, where time itself seemed to slip its leash. Two girls shared laughter and cheap wine, dreaming under constellations, until one blink left the other alone in a reality she did not recognize. Minutes turned into hours without explanation. Two stories collided into one impossible paradox, each swearing the other had vanished, each convinced they had been abandoned. No scratches, no footprints, no proof, only a wounded memory. A reminder that reality is thinner than we think, and that the night sky hides more than it reveals. These stories are not connected by geography or people. They are tied by atmosphere, by the oppressive weight of a summer night when the air is too thick to move and the world feels tilted. They remind us how quickly ordinary life can be peeled away to expose what lurks beneath. A hidden operation behind a suburban door, a stranger nesting in the walls of a family home, a breach in time that swallows two girls in different ways. They share the same unshakable lesson that the night does not care who you are, how safe you feel, or how prepared you believe yourself to be. It waits, it watches, and sometimes it acts. When the stories end, we like to search for reasons. We tell ourselves Chris was just unlucky, that the family in Delaware simply inherited the wrong house, that two teenagers must have confused their memories under the haze of wine. But that is the comfort talking. The truth is harsher. There are things that will never be explained, moments when the world slips its mask and shows us how fragile our place in it really is. And once you have seen that side, once you have felt the breath in the walls, the twitch of the curtain, the sudden cold of a starless sky, you cannot unsee it. You carry it with you. The price of these nights is not only the fear they create, but the way they stain memory. Chris still sees the twitch of fabric. The father still dreams of screams muffled by plaster. The girl still remembers opening her eyes to an empty field. Different places, different people, same summer night dread. The question that lingers for all of them, and maybe for you, is whether it will ever happen again, and whether next time you will walk away. Summer nights often trick us into believing we are safe. The warmth, the stillness, the soft hum of crickets, they wrap around us like a lullaby, convincing us that nothing bad can happen beneath a sky so calm. But the stories we have just walked through prove the opposite. They show that the most terrifying truths often bloom in the hours when the world slows down, when we least expect them. Chris was only 17, trying to earn a paycheck delivering pizzas, when he stumbled into the middle of a hidden operation. A single knock at the wrong door could have changed his life forever. If the curtain had pulled back, if the officers had not arrived at that exact moment, his story might have ended differently. What he learned, and what we should learn, is that instructions that feel wrong usually are, if something feels off, trust that feeling. The family in Delaware thought they had inherited a place of peace, a sanctuary by the ocean. Instead, they discovered that safety is only as real as the barriers we believe in. Behind their walls lived a stranger, waiting, breathing, ready to strike. Their terror reminds us to know the spaces we occupy. Inspect the corners. Lock the doors. Do not assume walls protect you just because you cannot see through them. Sometimes danger hides in the silence between breaths. And then there is the story of two girls under the stars, swallowed by a mystery no police officer could explain, no locked door could prevent. It is the kind of experience that erases certainty, a reminder that reality itself may bend. Whether it was supernatural or something more psychological, the impact was the same. A fracture in trust, a friendship forever shadowed by questions that can never be answered. For us, it is a warning that not every horror can be understood or solved. Some simply linger, reshaping the way we look at the night sky. So what can we take from these nights of fear? First, always listen to your instincts. If your gut whispers that something is wrong, do not ignore it. Second, remember that safety is an active effort. Check your surroundings, secure your environment, and do not assume the familiar is harmless. Finally, accept that there are mysteries without solutions. Sometimes the only survival is to walk away, to carry the scar but not let it consume you. These three stories, different yet united, show us that horror does not always hide in abandoned asylums or haunted mansions. It hides in pizza deliveries, in inherited beach houses, in the quiet ritual of stargazing with a friend. It hides in the ordinary, and that is why it is so terrifying. If you want to continue exploring true stories where the ordinary turns into the unthinkable, where the night itself becomes a predator, then stay with us. Subscribe to The Price Paid, because these stories are only the beginning. And remember, the night does not need monsters to be frightening. Sometimes it only needs silence.